Tonight, I'd like you to set the day down gently, the way you'd set down something heavy that you've carried a little too far. Let your shoulders sink. Let your hands rest wherever they've fallen, wherever you are right now, under a warm blanket, in a dark room, listening with one ear while sleep circles a little closer. You're exactly where you need to be. Because tonight we're traveling further back than almost anywhere we've ever gone, past the knights and the castles, past the Vikings, past Rome, past Athens, back 4,500 years to a limestone plateau above a wide brown river where the largest building the world has ever seen is rising into the sky, one impossible stone at a time. You know this building. Everyone on Earth knows this building. But tonight, you won't see it the way the postcards show it, golden and finished and eternal. You'll see it half built, swarming with dust and rope and shouting, wet with sweat and river water. And you won't be watching from a distance. You'll be there, not as a pharaoh, not as a priest or a prince or an architect whose name gets carved into history. You'll be one of the thousands of ordinary people who actually lifted the thing, a farmer with river mud still under your fingernails, a strong back, blistered hands, and a very long summer ahead of you. Because here is the truth the postcards never tell you. The Great Pyramid was not built by magic, and it was not built by aliens. And, as we'll discover together tonight, it was not built by the armies of slaves the movies gave us. It was built by people like you. And for those people, it was magnificent, and it was meaningful, and in 100 aching, sunburned, back-breaking ways. It absolutely sucked. Before we cross the river together, two small things while you're still settling in. If these long, slow journeys into the past help you rest, tap that subscribe button. It takes a second and it tells us to keep making them. And down in the comments, leave the oldest story your family still tells. The one handed down from a great grandparent, or further back, the kind nobody can quite prove anymore, but everyone keeps telling anyway. And if your family's old stories have gone quiet, just tell us where in the world you're drifting off tonight. We read them all, and there's something wonderful about a comment section full of family legends and faraway places gathered under one sleepy video. Now, dim whatever lights are left. Slow your breathing to match the pace of my voice. The year is somewhere around 2560 BC. Egypt is young, and its king is a god, and the river is rising. Let's begin. You were born in a village of mud brick and palm shade in the flat green world of the Nile Delta, where the great river frays apart into 100 slow channels on its way to the sea. Your whole life is measured by that river, not by years, by risings. Every summer, far away in lands you will never see, rains fall on mountains you cannot imagine, and the Nile begins to swell. It creeps up over its banks, brown and patient, and spreads across the fields like a blessing being poured from a jug. The Egyptians call this season Akhet, the inundation. For 3 months, the whole floor of your world disappears under shining water, and the villages stand above it on their mounds like little islands, and there is nothing for a farmer to do but wait. This is the season when the flood feeds the land, and when the king feeds on labor. You hear the boat before you see it, oars, and the slap of water, and then a scribe stepping onto the mud of your landing with a roll of papyrus under his arm and 2 bored-looking officials behind him. The whole village gathers, because the whole village already knows what this is. It happens every year, somewhere, to someone. Royal labor duty. The king is building his horizon, his eternal house, on the plateau at Giza, and the king's house is built the way everything in Egypt is built, by everyone a little at a time. The scribe unrolls his list. He reads names the way scribes always read names, flatly without looking up, as if the sounds have nothing to do with the people standing in front of him. And then he reads yours. There's a strange, weightless moment when you hear it. Your mother's hand finds your arm. Your younger brother looks at you with something that is not quite envy and not quite fear. Because this summons is two things at once, and every person in the village knows both of them by heart, it is an honor. You will serve the God King himself. You will eat the king's bread and drink the king's beer for a season, and when you are old, you will be able to say, I helped raise the horizon of Khufu. In a village where most lives are as flat as the fields, that is not nothing. And it is also 3 months of the hardest labor a human body can do in the hottest months of the year, far from your family, hauling stones the size of oxen up a mountain that men are building with their hands. Some men come back from the plateau with silver in their stories and new muscle on their shoulders. Some come back with fingers missing, or a back that never quite unbends again. A few every year do not come back at all. You have 3 days. Your mother packs a sack, hard bread, a rope of onions, a small pot of the good oil she was saving. Your father, who holds stone for the old king's pyramid at Dashur when he was your age, says very little, but on the last night he takes your hands in his and turns them over, palms up, and looks at them for a long moment in the lamplight. Soft, he says, not for long. You travel the way everything travels in Egypt, by water. There are no real roads in this country, and during the flood there is no need for any. The Nile is the road, the highway, the artery of the whole kingdom, and just now it is at its widest and most generous. The barge that comes for you is broad and shallow and crowded with other men like you, farmers from a dozen delta villages, some of them boys on their first rotation, some of them veterans going back for their fourth or fifth season. The wind in Egypt blows almost always from the north, and the current flows always toward the sea, and that simple arrangement of nature is the engine of the entire civilization. Raise the sail to go south, ride the current to come home. Your sail fills, and the flooded world begins to slide past. It is, you have to admit, beautiful. The valley has become a shining inland sea, and the villages ride on it like boats at anchor, each one crowned with palms and smoke. Herons stalk the drowned field edges. Boys pole skiffs between the mounds, ferrying goats and gossip. In the evenings, the water turns copper, then rose, then a deep bruised purple, and the men on the barge sing the long, low songs that keep rowers together, and you find yourself singing too, because it's easier than thinking about where you're going. You are 2 days upriver when a veteran named Epi nudges you and points south, and you see it for the first time. At first, you honestly think it's a trick of the light, a pale triangle standing on the western horizon, too large and too regular to be anything made by people. Then the barge draws closer, hour by hour, and the triangle refuses to become a hill, refuses to become a cloud, and slowly, slowly becomes exactly what it is, an unfinished mountain. A stepped, truncated mass of golden stone the size of a landscape, crawling with movement, hazed with dust, its flat top bristling with ramps and rigging like a wound in the sky that thousands of tiny figures are trying to close. You've heard about it your whole life. Everyone has. But hearing about it is like hearing about the sea, and this is standing in the surf. Ipik watches your face and laughs, not unkindly. Everyone goes quiet the first time, he says, even the donkeys. The harbor at Giza is the busiest place you have ever seen. A made harbor, an artificial basin dug at the desert's edge and connected to the Nile by canal, so that during the flood the boats can ride the high water almost to the foot of the plateau itself. Barges are stacked 3 deep at the quays, some low in the water with cargoes of gleaming white stone, some unloading grain, cattle, timber, coils of rope thicker than your arm. Overseers with staffs and papyrus tallies shout numbers over the din. Somewhere a bull is bellowing. Everything smells of river mud, dung, fresh cut wood, and under it all, faintly, the dry mineral smell of broken stone, a smell you don't know yet, but which you will carry in your nose for the rest of your life. You shoulder your sack and step off the barge into the crowd, one drop of water joining a flood. Above you, over the roofs and the masts and the dust, the unfinished mountain of the God King blocks out a corner of the sky. Welcome, someone stamps and records and waves to the horizon of Khufu. Here is something the postcards never show you. Pyramids are not built in empty deserts. They are built next to cities, and if the city doesn't exist, the king builds that too. South of the plateau, below a long stone wall the workers call the Wall of the Crow, sprawls a purpose-built town that exists for one reason only: to keep the pyramid fed. Archaeologists, 4,500 years from tonight, will dig it out of the sand and call it the lost city of the pyramid builders. You just call it the barracks, or home, or, on bad days, the ant heap. It is laid out the way scribes lay out everything, in lines. Long parallel buildings, called galleries, each one a kind of dormitory, where 40 or 50 men sleep in rows on reed mats, packed close enough that you learn your neighbors' snores before you learn their names. There are streets of bakeries, whole blocks of them, where bread is baked not by the loaf, but by the thousand, in heavy bell-shaped clay pots buried in embers. There are breweries beside the bakeries, because bread and beer are made from the same grain, and in Egypt they are practically the same food. There are yards where fish from the river are split and salted and dried on racks by the 10,000, and pens where cattle driven up from the Delta estates wait, unaware, to become the workforce's protein. Everything about the place is enormous, and everything about it is counted. That is the first thing you truly learn at Giza, before you learn ropes, before you learn stone. The pyramid is not really a building project. It is a feeding project, a counting project, an organizing project with a building attached. Somewhere on this plateau, the king's men solve every single day a problem that would humble any age. How do you put bread, beer, fish, and onions into 20 or 30,000 working bodies every day for 20 years without missing a morning? On your first evening, a scribe with kind eyes and a merciless list assigns you to your place in the machine. The workforce is divided like an army. You are given to a crew, a body of hundreds of men that works together and competes fiercely with its rival crews. The crews carry names, boastful ones, painted on the stones they move. The crew of another gang calls itself something like the Friends of Khufu, and a generation from now, on a neighboring pyramid, a crew will cheerfully sign its blocks as the Drunkards of Menkaure. Your crew is split into 5 companies the workers call files, named like the parts of a ship, and your file is split again into little divisions of 10 or 20 men. Those 10 or 20 men are about to become your whole world. That night, you lie on your mat in the long gallery, listening to 50 strangers breathe. Somewhere a man is humming a Delta song you know, and somewhere another man is crying very quietly, the way grown men cry when they think no one can hear, because he is 19 and has never slept a night away from his village. You stare up into the dark. Tomorrow, before dawn, a drum will sound, and the machine you are now part of will pick you up like a grain of wheat and carry you up the ramps into the dust. You are one of tens of thousands. You have a mat, a crew, a file, a division, and a number on a list. What you do not have anymore is a choice. The drum sounds in the dark, and the first thing the king's machine does with you is feed you. You line up in the gray pre-dawn with your division, 10 men still learning each other's faces, and a bakery worker hands each of you bread. Not delicate bread, workers' bread, dense, heavy loaves the size of your 2 fists together, still warm from the bell pots, gritty with the fine sand that gets into everything in Egypt, including famously everyone's teeth. With it comes beer, poured from a great jar into your own rough cup. Egyptian beer is nothing like the clear, sharp drink of later ages. It is thick, cloudy, sweetish, more like a drinkable porridge than a drink, low in strength, high in everything a working body needs. Men drink it at dawn, at midday, and at night, and children drink it at home, and nobody thinks anything of it, because along the Nile, beer is not a vice. Beer is food. Beer is safe. Beer is wages. And that is the detail worth holding on to, there in the breakfast line with your warm loaf, wages. You are not fed as an owner feeds livestock. You are paid in the only currency a world without coins has ever needed. Grain in, labor out, all of it written down. Every loaf you are handed exists on a scribe's tally somewhere, next to your name. The rations are, honestly, better than you expected. Better in a lean year than home. Bread and beer twice a day, and more on feast days. Onions and garlic, which the whole country eats, like other nations, eat luxuries. Fish from the river, dried or fresh, in quantities a Delta boy can respect. And meat, actual beef, appears often enough to startle you. The bone piles of your town, when archaeologists sift them in the distant future, will tell them that the pyramid builders ate enough cattle, sheep, and goat to feed thousands of people meat on a regular basis. Prime cattle, some of it, driven in from estates across the delta, including, perhaps, estates not far from your own village. It is entirely possible that you are eating beef your cousins raised. So no, you will not starve at Giza. The God King does not starve his builders. He does something more clear-eyed than cruelty. He keeps them strong, because strong men move more stone. You finish the loaf, you drain the cup. Around you, thousands of men are doing the same, an entire city chewing in the half-dark, and above the rooftops, The pyramid is turning from gray to gold as the sun finds it first. The drum sounds again. Breakfast is over. Now comes the part of the bargain that you pay. Your first assignment is not on the pyramid at all. It is in the pit the pyramid is being born from. Just south of the rising monument, a few minutes' walk from its base, lies the quarry, and your first sight of it stops you mid-step, the same way the pyramid did from the river. It is a canyon made by men, a vast sunken field of bedrock, carved down and down in giant steps, its floor crisscrossed with trenches, its walls showing the clean pale scars of 10,000 removed blocks. The pyramid above you contains something like 2,300,000 blocks of stone, most of them cut from right here, from this one wound in the plateau, block by block by block. The mountain on the skyline is simply this hole, turned inside out and stacked toward the sun. The quarry has its own weather. Heat pools in it. Dust hangs over it in a permanent pale haze that turns the workers ghost-colored by mid-morning. And the sound, you will dream about the sound. Hundreds of copper chisels ringing against limestone at once, wooden mallets knocking, picks crunching, rubble sliding, overseers calling the count. It is like standing inside an enormous instrument that only plays one song from dawn until dusk, forever. The work itself is brutally simple. The stone here is limestone, soft, as stone goes, soft enough to cut with copper and patience, which is fortunate because copper and patience are what Egypt has. A team marks out a block on the quarry floor with string and red ochre. Then men with picks and chisels cut narrow trenches around it, deep channels just wide enough for a worker to crouch in, sweating, hammering, inches from his neighbor's elbows. You spend your first days in those trenches, learning what your father's look at your palms meant. The chisel rings, the mallet knocks, chips of limestone sting your forearms. By the second day, your hands are blistered. By the fifth day, the blisters have torn and dried and started their slow conversion into callus, and an older man in your division rubs oil into them at night without being asked because someone once did it for him. When a block stands free on three sides, it must be broken from the bedrock beneath, persuaded loose with long levers, with hammering, and some of the old hands say, with wooden wedges soaked in water, until they swell, and the stone gives way with a crack you feel in your teeth. The block comes free. It is the size of a sleeping ox, and it weighs on average some 2.5 tons. Men cheer briefly. Then somebody points out that it is down here, and the pyramid is up there, and the cheering stops. Here is one of the quiet, grinding truths of your new life, the kind that never makes it into legends. The tools are almost as much work as the stone. This is the Bronze Age only barely, and at Giza it is really the Copper Age. Your chisels, your picks, the long saws the masons use, copper, nearly all of it, and copper is soft. Strike limestone with a copper chisel, and the limestone loses, but not by much. The edge folds, the point blunts. A chisel that starts the morning sharp is a sad, rounded slug of metal by the time the sun is properly up. So the quarry runs on a constant circulation of metal, like blood. Boys and runners move endlessly between the work gangs and the smiths' stations, carrying baskets of dulled tools down and baskets of fresh-edged tools back. At the stations, smiths and grinders work through the whole day doing nothing, but resharpening, hammering edges back, regrinding points on abrasive stone. Some scholars will one day estimate that keeping the chisels alive employed small armies all by itself. You believe it. You have stood in the tool line at midday, waiting, watching a smith's forearms, and thinking that his job might genuinely be worse than yours. And copper is only for the soft stone, where the work meets granite, and up in the heart of the pyramid, in the king's own chambers, it will, copper simply surrenders. For granite, there is a blunter answer, dolerite, a stone harder than granite itself, shaped into pounders the size of a big man's fist, and swung over and over and over by workers who do nothing else. You have seen a granite team at the harbor dressing a block, a line of men, each with his black pounder, bashing the surface in rhythm, bruising the granite away dust by dust. An hour of that pounding removes a layer as thick as a fingernail. Their forearms look like ship's cable. Their faces look 1,000 years old. Sand, too, is a tool here, the desert's one endless gift. Sand under a copper saw becomes the actual cutting edge. Sand under a drill grinds out sockets and hollows. Sand poured beneath a tilted block becomes a cushion to lower it by. Egypt, you begin to understand, is a civilization that looked at what the gods left lying around: soft metal, hard stone, infinite sand, a river, and an enormous number of patient human beings, and decided that was enough to build a mountain. Your hands, by the end of the first month, have become someone else's hands, cracked, yellow calloused, seamed with white limestone dust that never fully washes out. Village hands go soft in the flood season. Yours will never be soft again. Eventually, inevitably, your rotation comes, and you are assigned to the hauling gangs. This is the work the whole world will still be arguing about in 4,500 years. This is the work your grandchildren will ask about. This is also, you can say with authority, the exact spot where building the pyramid stops being a marvel and becomes a very long, very heavy day. There are no wheels here worth speaking of, no cranes, no pulleys, no engines. There is a wooden sledge, a lot of rope, and you. The block, your block, 2.5 tons of fresh limestone, is levered up onto a stout wooden sledge and lashed down with rope made from palm fiber and papyrus, rope the thickness of your wrist, rope that arrives at Giza by the boatload and wears out almost as fast as the chisels. Your team takes up the lines. Depending on the block and the slope, that team is anywhere from 12 men to 40 or more, arranged in pairs along the ropes like oxen, a comparison the overseers make often, and not always as a joke. Then comes the trick that makes the impossible merely miserable. Ahead of the sledge, a man walks with a jar, pouring water onto the track, and the track itself is prepared ground, often surfaced with slick river clay. Wet clay and wet sand grip a sledge far less greedily than dry ground. The water binds the surface so the runners glide instead of plowing. Centuries from now, a tomb painting will show exactly this: a colossal statue on a sledge, a worker pouring water before it. And centuries after that, scientists with instruments will confirm what you learn today with your shoulders. The right amount of water can cut the dragging force by something close to half, which still leaves the other half. The foreman calls the count. 40 backs lean into the ropes as one, and there is a moment. Every single pull has this moment when nothing happens, when the block simply declines and the rope groans and your feet slide and the world narrows to fiber and breath. And then the sledge unsticks and the block begins to move at the pace of something royal and unhurried, and it must not be allowed to stop because starting is the enemy. Keeping it gliding is merely agony, but starting again is despair. So you chant. Everyone chants. The chants keep 40 spines pulling in the same heartbeat, and they are old and rude and funny, and you will remember them on your deathbed. Step and pull and step and pull. The waterman pours. The foreman counts. The block glides toward the ramps at the speed of honey. Somewhere on this plateau, teams like yours deliver a block into place every couple of minutes of every working day. That is the arithmetic of the pyramid, and it only works if 10,000 shoulders agree all day, every day, for 20 years. Today, yours agree. Tonight, they will file their complaint. Let's pause on the slope for a moment, you and I, because we have arrived at the question every person in every century asks about this place. How exactly do 2.5-ton blocks get up a mountain? Here is the honest answer, whispered across 4,500 years. Nobody in my time knows for certain. The pyramid keeps that secret better than it kept its king. But you, standing here with rope burns on your palms, you know what you can see, and what you can see are ramps, great causeways of rubble, desert clay, and broken stone, packed hard and surfaced slick, crawling up the flanks of the monument. Where they ran and how they climbed is the part the future will argue about, long after every ramp has been torn down and carted away. Some scholars will picture one colossal straight ramp rising against a single face of the pyramid, simple, brutal, and so enormous that building it would be a wonder of the world all by itself. Others will imagine ramps that wrap around the pyramid as it rises, winding up the outside like a serpent coiled on a mountain. Others still will propose something stranger and more elegant, ramps hidden inside the monument itself, spiraling up within the walls, swallowed by the very stone they helped to raise. Each theory solves one problem and trips over another. The pyramid listens to all of them and says nothing. You don't need the whole answer. You only need your stretch of it. Your world is 40 feet of packed clay track, rising ahead of you at a grade the overseers keep merciful and the gods keep long. Water glistening on the surface, the rope over your shoulder, the block behind you, patient as fate. You lean and chant and climb. What you notice day after day is the pyramid's one small kindness. It shrinks as it grows. The base course swallowed stone by the hundreds of thousands, but each new level is smaller than the last. The higher the monument climbs, the fewer blocks each course needs, until far above you the work narrows toward a point, like the ending of a very long story. The old hands say the bottom third of the pyramid holds most of the stone in the whole thing. You believe them because you helped carry it. Somewhere above you, every hour, a block arrives where no block has ever been before, and the tallest thing human beings have ever made becomes quietly a little taller. And you pulled it there? Whatever the future decides about the ramps, that part will always be true. At the top of the ramp, your block stops being cargo and becomes architecture, and it changes hands. Up here on the working surface, The rough democracy of the hauling gangs gives way to specialists, setting crews, smaller teams, older men mostly, with levers and cradles and an unhurried priestly calm that comes from spending years doing something where a single careless moment can erase a foot. They take your block the last few yards with wooden levers, walking it forward inches at a time. Lever, block, breathe. Lever, block, breathe. While a foreman sights along strings and calls corrections in a voice that never rises. You linger when the overseers let you, because the top of the pyramid is the strangest place you have ever stood. It is a stone plain in the sky, acres of level limestone, swarming with crews, stacked with blocks waiting in rows like loaves, webbed with cord lines and red ochre marks, and beyond the edge, nothing. The world falls away on every side. To the east, the flooded valley blazes like beaten silver, and the river traffic crawls along it, sails the size of moth wings. To the west, the desert runs to the end of everything, brown and silent. You can see villages. You can see the harbor, the barracks town, the smoke of 1,000 bread ovens. You suspect, though no one has ever told you so, that you can see farther than any farmer in the history of the world. The masons hardly look. They have a block to bed. Down it comes, eased off its sledge onto a sand bed or timber skids, then persuaded, levered, nudged, coaxed, until it kisses its neighbors. Fitters check the joints. Some of the core stone sits rough and honest, gaps packed with rubble and gypsum mortar. No one will ever see the pyramid's insides, and the pyramid's insides know it. But the outer work, the casing that will one day face the sun, that stone is dressed until the joints are so tight and fine that visitors in distant ages will swear you could not slide a blade between them, and will invent gods and lost races to explain it, rather than believe in patient men with copper tools. When the block settles true, the foreman marks it, the scribe counts it, and this is your favorite part, the part you'll tell your children. Sometimes a crewman with a brush and red paint scrawls the gang's name across a face that is about to be buried in darkness forever. A boast no one will ever read, written for the joy of it. 1 block, 2.5 tons, a morning of your one and only life. There are 2,299,999 more. Not all of the pyramid comes from the quarry pit at Giza. The best of it, the skin it will show the sun, comes from across the river. And thanks to one tired, dutiful man with a reed pen, the future will know exactly how. On the east bank of the Nile, upstream from Giza, lie the quarries of Tura, and the stone that comes out of them is like nothing from your dusty pit. Fine white limestone, close-grained, almost luminous, stone that cuts clean and polishes soft and holds light the way linen holds perfume. This is casing stone, reserved for the pyramid's outer faces, and it arrives at Giza the way everything good arrives in Egypt, by boat. You see the Tura boats come in on your water-carrying days at the harbor, broad wooden freighters riding low, decks stacked with white blocks, bright enough to squint at. And on those decks, workmen whose lives the future will read like a letter, because one of their inspectors, a man named Mirror, keeps a logbook. He is nobody's special Mirror, a mid-level official in charge of a team of about 40 sailors and haulers. But day after day, in neat lines on papyrus, he records the unglamorous truth of his work. Loading white stone at Tura, sailing down river. delivering to the construction harbor at the place he calls Sa'aket Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, sailing back empty, loading again. 2 or 3 round trips in a 10-day week, week after week, his crew's whole existence a shuttle between a hole in the ground and a mountain in the sky. He notes the days, he notes the cargo, he mentions now and then reporting to the works of the mighty, to none other than Ankaf, the king's own half brother, the great overseer who commands this entire universe of stone and bread and rope. Mirror will never know it, but his tattered logbook will outlast the king's body, the king's treasure, and very nearly the king's name. 45 centuries from tonight, archaeologists will find its fragments in a dry cave by the Red Sea, where his crew once worked between assignments, and it will be the oldest inscribed papyrus ever discovered in Egypt. The everyday timesheet of a middle manager become the most precious paperwork on earth. There is something in that worth carrying down into sleep. The king built the pyramid to make one name eternal, but the record that survived, the actual human voice from the actual dusty work, belongs to a man like you, a man counting cargo, watching the river, doing his shift, and writing it down. The white stone slides past you on the canal, boat after boat after boat, bound for the faces of the mountain. One day, all of it placed, the pyramid will catch the morning sun and blaze like a risen star. You will be long gone home by then, but your name is on a list, and Mare's boats are on the water, and the mountain grows. Now we come to the heart of it, the part the title of tonight's story promised you, because the true hardship of building the pyramid is not any single dramatic thing. It is the sun and the sameness and the slow arithmetic of what the work does to a human body. Understand what the flood season means on this plateau. It is high summer. The very months when the river frees, the farmers are the months when Egypt burns hottest. By mid-morning, the limestone glare makes you work through your own squint. By noon, the stone is too hot to rest a bare hand on. The dust cakes on sweat and dries into a second skin, and the whole plateau shimmers as if the air itself were tired. The overseers are not fools. Water carriers move constantly along the lines, boys with yokes and jars, and there is shade and rest at the worst of midday, because the king's machine has learned what happens to men who are pushed past it. But there is no engineering away an Egyptian summer. There is only enduring it, jar by jar, hour by hour. And beneath the heat, quieter, runs the sameness. Pull, step, chant, pour. The same 40 feet of ramp, the same rope on the same shoulder. You develop a groove there, a rope-shaped valley in the muscle, and you learn to switch sides to wear evenly like a sandal. 10 days make a week here. You work 8 or 9 of them and rest 1, and the weeks stack up the way the courses do, one on another, until you can no longer clearly remember whether the thing you did yesterday happened yesterday or 20 days ago. The body files its reports. Your palms went first, and then your shoulders learned, but the spine keeps a ledger. It never shows you until later. In 4,500 years, when archaeologists lift the bones of your workmates from their graves, the bones themselves will testify. Vertebrae compressed and worn from years under load. Arthritis in knees and backs and shoulders, arriving decades before old age. Joints of 35-year-old men worn like those of the elderly. The skeletons of the pyramid builders, the scientists will say, are the skeletons of people who worked as hard as any human beings who ever lived. You know none of that vocabulary. You only know that you are 22, and some mornings, in the gray dark before the drum, you have to roll onto your side and push yourself up with an arm, like your father does. The sun does not care. The sun has 20 more years of this planned, and the drum, as always, will sound soon enough. There is one power on this plateau that outranks the overseers, the scribes, and the king's own schedule. And one morning, a few weeks into your rotation, you meet it. It announces itself the way the old hands say it always does, with a wrongness in the light. The dawn comes up yellow instead of gold, then brown instead of yellow, and the western horizon, the clean line of desert you have looked at every day of your season, is simply gone, replaced by a standing wall of haze the color of an old bruise. The donkeys feel it first and say so loudly. Then the wind arrives from the deep desert, hot as an oven door tasting of grit, and the foremen are already shouting the order. Nobody needs to hear twice. Down tools, cover the water, get below. The desert wind, later ages will call its season the Khamsin, does not negotiate. Sand strips the world down to a 10-pace circle. It gets into everything. You already knew Egyptian sand as a fact of bread and bedding, but this is sand as weather, sand as a living thing, hissing along the ground in ropes, drumming on the gallery roofs, sifting through every seam in the brickwork until the air inside the barracks sparkles faintly in the lamplight. Work on the mountain is unthinkable. A hauling team cannot chant with its mouth full of desert. A surveyor's string is a joke. A man on the high courses in that wind is a funeral waiting for its date. So for a day, sometimes two, the veterans say, once memorably four, the largest construction project on earth simply stops, and 20,000 people wait indoors like one enormous held breath. And here is the strange gift inside the misery. The storm days are the closest thing the season has to a festival. The kitchens still work, bakers being the one priesthood no weather can excuse, and food comes around, and with nothing to haul, the barracks fill up with everything men carry inside them, and rarely have daylight to unpack. Songs with all the verses for once, sonnet tournaments of terrible seriousness. Jitty the rope master holding a knot school for the young ones, hands moving like water while the wind screams. Stories, real ones, home ones, flood survived, fathers lost, the girl at the third village past the bend. You learn more about the 10 men of your division in one storm day than in a month on the rope. You fall asleep that night to the oldest lullaby in the world, a storm outside a wall you trust, packed warm in a row of snoring Delta men, oddly, guiltily content. The morning after is dazzling and still, the whole sky rinsed clean. And then comes the reckoning the veterans warned you about, the storm's true price. The plateau has been redressed in desert. Sand lies drifted against every block and barracks wall. The slick clay ramps are buried and must be dug out and resurfaced. Every tool store, every water jar, every bread crate is opened, checked, tipped, and cursed over. 2 full days of hauling nothing but the desert itself off the King's Mountain, so that tomorrow you can go back to hauling the mountain. The desert, the old hands shrug, was here first. It lets you build. It likes to be remembered. You remember it ever after, exactly the way it asked, with your teeth. Now let's take a moment here in the quiet middle of the night to bury the biggest myth ever told about you. 20 centuries after your death, a Greek traveler named Herodotus will visit Egypt. He will stand where tourists still stand, gazing up at the finished pyramid, and he will write down what the local guides tell him, that 100,000 men toiled here in gangs, driven without mercy, and that the wicked king Khufu reduced Egypt to misery to build his tomb. Herodotus is a marvelous writer, and he is working with stories that have been retold, embellished, and traded for tips for 2,000 years, as far from your lifetime as tonight's listener is from Rome. Later ages will pile onto his tale. Paintings will add whips, films will add chains, and cruel overseers on golden chariots. And the word everyone will reach for is slaves. And here is what the actual ground will say when archaeologists finally ask it no. They will find your barracks town with its streets of bakeries and its mountains of cattle bone, because slave gangs are not provisioned with prime beef. They will find the tally systems, the rations flowing out against names, labor paid in bread and beer, because slaves are not paid. They will find the medical evidence, bones with splinted fractures carefully healed, because a workforce treated as disposable is not treated at all. And on the slope overlooking the work site, they will find the thing that settles it, your cemetery. Workers buried with honor in the shadow of the king's own monument, with bread and beer set beside them for eternity. In Egypt, to rest beside the god king's horizon is a privilege bordering on the sacred. It is not what a kingdom gives to property. It is what it gives to people it is proud of. The truer picture is the one you are living. The core of this workforce is professional, skilled masons, setters, boatmen, smiths, careermen who serve year-round and take genuine pride in their craft. Around that core, season by season, flows the rotating labor of ordinary Egypt, farmers like you, summoned village by village, serving their term and going home. Your service is a duty, a tax really, paid in muscle instead of grain, in an age before money. You did not volunteer, and no one pretends you did. But you are fed, housed, doctored, counted, rested, and released. You have a name on a list, a crew that knows you, and a state that, for reasons both wholly and ruthlessly practical, wants you alive and strong. So no, it did not suck because you were a slave. That insult, at least, history got wrong. It sucked the honest way, the way all enormous human efforts suck, in heat and weight and distance from home, in blisters and monotony and a spine spent early. You are not driven by whips, you are driven by duty, by faith, by the tally, and by the ancient familiar fact that when the king calls, a farmer goes. The mountain above you was not built on chains, it was built on shoulders. Sleep with that correction tonight. It belongs to the men who earned it. Here is something else the legends of cruel bondage never explain. Why the stones of the pyramid have jokes on them. Deep inside the monument, on blocks no human eye was ever meant to see again, work crews leave their marks, quick lines of red paint, brushed on in the quarry or on the ramps. Leveling lines, setting marks, tallies, and over names. Not the names of nobles, the names of gangs. Crews sign their work the way ball players sign a winning ball, in bold, boastful team names built around loyalty to the king, the friends of Khufu. And a generation on, when the third pyramid rises on this plateau for King Menkaura, one of its crews will immortalize itself on stone bound for eternal darkness as the drunkards of Menkar. Slaves do not name their chain gangs after a pub boast. Teams do that. And Giza, you discover, runs on teams the way it runs on bread. Your crew is one of two great rival bodies, and the rivalry is real, constant, and, the overseers privately admit, extremely useful. Everything is a contest. Which gang moves more blocks before the midday rest? Which file's stretch of ramp is fastest? Which division's block seats true on the first try? The tallies that the scribes keep for rations double, unofficially, as a scoreboard, and men who could barely be paid to hurry for an overseer will half kill themselves to beat the crew from the other side of the barracks. On feast days, the winning gang eats first, drinks deepest, and sings loudest, and the losing gang loudly explains, at length, why the contest was unfair. Inside the gang, the loyalty runs bone deep. These are the 10 and 20 men who haul when you falter and cover when you're sick, who know the names of your parents and the sound of your snore. You fight sometimes. Men packed that close always do. Over rations, over places on the rope, over a Delta man's opinion of Valley men, and the Valley men's detailed reply. But let an outsider lay blame on one of yours, and the whole division arrives like weather. Somewhere in the future, scholars sifting these painted marks will read them with something close to tenderness, because graffiti is the opposite of anonymity. Every red-daubed boast says the same thing across 45 centuries. We were here, together, and we were good at this. Your gang has a name too, and late in your rotation, on a core block bound for the blind interior of the greatest building on earth, a crewmate with a brush lets you make the last stroke of it. No one will ever see it. You will think about it for the rest of your life. For every man on a rope, there is another whom the stories will forget entirely, and without him, the rope man dies in a day. So spare a moment as you drift for the invisible army. The water carriers first, because on this plateau they are the difference between a workforce and a casualty list. Hundreds of them, many just boys, moving endlessly between the wells, the canal, and the lines, yokes across their shoulders, heavy jars swaying, bare feet quick on the hot stone. A hauling team drinks like a field of cattle. Somebody has to be the river's last mile, all day, every day, uphill. It is the first job many Giza boys ever hold, and grown haulers treat a good water boy with the deference other ages will reserve for physicians. Then the rope makers, twisting palm fiber and papyrus into the tendons of the entire project, because every sledge, every lever, every boat and barge runs on cordage, and cordage under 2-ton loads dies young. The carpenters, mending sledge runners chewed to splinters, shaping levers, building and rebuilding the timber cradles. The gypsum burners, cooking plaster for mortar in smoking kilns. The mud brick crews, forever patching ramps that 10,000 feet and 100 sledges grind down daily. The bakers and brewers, of course. You have seen the bakery streets at full production, heat rolling out of the doors, hundreds of bell pots in the embers, and understood that those men fight their own war of endurance, one loaf per soldier per meal, forever. The fishermen in the drying yards, the butchers, the laundry crews at the canal, the sandal makers, the men who do nothing, sunrise to sunset, but resharpen copper. Stand at the wall of the Crow at dawn and you can watch the whole organism wake. Stone gangs flowing north toward the plateau, provisions flowing after them, water moving everywhere, and threading through it all, the runners, messenger boys carrying tallies, tools, orders, gossip, stitching 20,000 people into one creature with a single enormous intention. Here is the arithmetic no monument ever advertises. For the pyramid to rise one block every couple of minutes, most of the people building it must never touch a block at all. The mountain is the visible tenth of the effort. The rest is bread, water, rope, and counting. Your grandchildren will ask about the stones, and you will tell them about the stones. But some nights, what you will remember is a 9-year-old with a yoke, planting his feet against the slope of the ramp, lifting a jar to your cracked lips with both hands, deadly serious about doing it well. Empires are odd things. They are made of exactly that. Every machine has its discipline, and you should know, honestly, how this one enforces itself, because it isn't chains, but it isn't gentle either. Above your division stands a foreman, risen from the ranks, rope-scarred like you. Above him, the file leaders. Above them, crew chiefs and inspectors like the boatman Mirror. And above them all, the great overseers of the king's works, culminating at a height as remote as the pyramid's summit in Ankaf the king's brother, whom you have seen exactly once, at a distance, surrounded by scribes like a heron among ducklings. Authority at Giza is a staircase, and every step of it carries a staff and a tally. The tally is the true whip here. Your presence is recorded, morning and evening, against your name. Your gang's output is counted. Its rations rise and fall with its standing. Fall short, dawdle, vanish for a day, and the machine notices. First with the foreman's tongue, which can strip paint off a barrack's wall, then with duller work and thinner beer, and for the persistent, with penalties that climb toward real punishment. Egypt is a kind mother and a strict one. The staff in an overseer's hand is not ornamental, and a man flogged for stealing rations or shirking his gang carries the lesson home along with the marks. You have seen it done, twice. Nobody sang that evening. But here is what surprises you, coming from a small village where the headman's temper was the only law. The machine also keeps rules in your favor. Absence is not desertion if it has cause. The records this civilization leaves behind, including from later centuries of state labor, entire registers of workers' excused days, show a bureaucracy that logged illness, injuries, and duties at home, and simply marked them in absent with reasons in the eternal ledger. Scorpion stings, a fever, brewing beer for a household festival, embalming a mother. Sick men in your own gang are sent to the physicians, not the flog post. The state wants your labor for a season, not your destruction. A strong farmer returned home is next year's taxes, and the ledger knows it. So you learn the real shape of your bondage, which is subtler than chains and older than Egypt. You are watched, counted, needed, and known. You cannot slip away. Where would you go? In a kingdom that is one long river where every harbor master reads lists. But you also cannot easily be wronged without a record of it existing somewhere in red and black ink with your name spelled out. It is not freedom. It is not slavery. It is something every listener under a warm blanket tonight will recognize instantly across 45 centuries. It is having a job. We're at the halfway point of the climb now, you and I, the pyramid half risen, the night half spent. And if you're still awake out there, drifting somewhere between your world and his, here's a small question to leave floating in the dark. Not to answer now, but perhaps to leave in the comments when morning comes. What would you give 20 years of your body to build? Every generation spends its spine on something. His bought a mountain. Let the question drift, like a boat with no oarsman. The story will carry you from here. It happens on an ordinary afternoon because it always happens on an ordinary afternoon. A block is being levered onto a sledge at the quarry's edge, a job your gang has done 1,000 times. When a timber shifts and the stone lurches, and a man named Nefer, who has hauled beside you all season, who taught you the third verse of the rudest chant and shared his mother's dried figs, does not move his foot in time. The sound is small. What follows is not. The gang swarms the block, levers screaming and drags him clear, and then everything is shouting and dust, and Nefer's white face, and his foot pointing a direction feet do not point. What happens next is the part the whip and chains legends could never explain. Nobody shrugs, nobody drags him aside to die. Runners go for a litter, and within the hour Nefer is down off the plateau and in the hands of the physicians, because this project, this city of labor, keeps physicians the way it keeps bakers. Egypt's healers are the most famous in the world, and for good reason. Theirs is a strange marriage of sharp observation and murmured spell. They will splint your fracture with wooden slats and linen bandage while reciting the words that keep demons out of the wound. And honestly, on the plateau, no one sees a contradiction. They stitch gashes. They dress wounds with honey, which the distant future will confirm fights infection, and with fresh meat to stanch bleeding. They set bones, and here the ground itself will one day testify, because when scientists examine the skeletons from the workers' cemetery, they will find fracture after fracture neatly healed, arms and legs mended straight, men who broke and were carefully rebuilt and went on living. They will find men who survived crushed and amputated limbs by years, survival that is impossible without care, rest, and someone deciding a laborer's life was worth the trouble. On this plateau, that decision has already been made in advance for everyone, which does not make it painless and does not make it safe, and tonight's story owes you the honest ledger. This work maims, and sometimes it kills. Stones slip, ramps give way, trenches collapse in the quarry. Fevers and infections walk through crowded barracks the way they walk through all crowded places, and some of the graves on the slope hold men younger than you. When it happens, the machine pauses, briefly, humanly. Gangs go quiet. Friends wash the body, and there are prayers, and an overseer records a name for the last time, and the great tally somewhere grows heavier by one. And then the drum sounds, because the drum always sounds, and the mountain must rise, and grief at Giza learns to walk uphill carrying rope. Nefer lives. You visit him in the evenings, foot splinted, propped in the shade, holding court on a mat, and milking his catastrophe for every cup of beer it is worth. The physicians say he will walk with a limp and haul no more this season. He is being fed, still against his name. When the rotation ends, the boats will carry him home with the rest of you. He will tell this story, foot thrust out toward the fire for the next 40 years. And every time, the block will get bigger. If you want to know the real secret of how the pyramid was built, the one hiding in plain sight behind the ramps and the rope, watch the men who never lift anything heavier than a reed pen. They are everywhere, the scribes. At the quarry, counting blocks out. At the ramps, counting blocks up. At the harbor, tallying boatloads of white Tura stone against manifests. At the bakeries at dawn. At the beer jars at dusk. At the muster where your name is called. And the infirmary where Nefer's rations are logged. Each one sits the same way, cross-legged, kilt stretched tight as a writing desk, palette balanced, one brush wet with black ink for the entries, and one with red for the headings and the corrections. They write on papyrus if they are lucky, and on flakes of white limestone if they are not, and they never ever stop. You grew up thinking of scribes the way farmers everywhere think of officials, soft men with clean hands who appear at harvest to take the count and a share. A season at Giza quietly changes your mind, because up here you can see the whole organism at once, and from up here it is obvious. The pyramid is not really made of stone. It is made of arithmetic, 20-odd thousand men, each fed twice daily for 20 years, rope by the ton, timber by the forest, copper by the mine. Every block ordered, cut, moved, and placed on schedule against the level lines. One mistake in the granary sums, and a crew goes hungry. One mistake in the survey sums, and a course of the king's eternal house sits crooked forever. The men with the brushes are not decorating the work. They are holding it up, and they are the reason you exist, in the only sense the future will know. Your body will return to the delta, and in time, to the earth. But your name, spelled out in a scribe's quick hand on a muster roll next to a tally of loaves, that has a different destiny. Egypt believes, with its whole heart, that to write a name is to make it live, that nothing recorded ever fully dies. The scribes believe it about the king, and write his name on everything. They do not think about it, probably, when they write yours between a neighbor's and a stranger's on a ration list. Just another entry. Black ink, red heading, next man. But it is the closest thing to a pyramid you will ever be given. A farmer's name, made permanent by a tired man with a brush, in the greatest pile of paperwork on earth. One morning at the harbor, the whole quay goes quiet, and you turn to see what everyone is looking at. A barge coming in low, impossibly low, water nearly at her gunwales, carrying a single stone. It is not white, and it is not gold. It is a deep, glittering rose gray, dense as a sleeping animal, and it is the size of a granary. Granite, and it has come farther than you have ever been. 500 miles and more upriver, at the far southern gate of Egypt, lie the granite quarries of Aswan, and everything you have learned about stone means nothing there. Granite laughs at copper. The men of Aswan work it the hard way, the only way, with dolerite pounders, hammering the living rock hour after hour, bruising out trenches around each block a knuckle's depth at a time, with fire and water and levers, with a patience that no longer even feels like patience, just a way of being alive. A single great block can take a crew months. Then it must be walked to the river on sledges, loaded, a science and a terror in itself, and floated the length of the entire kingdom, timed to the high forgiving waters of the flood, north past 1,000 villages of staring children, to arrive here at the foot of the mountain, exactly when the mountain needs it. Because deep in the pyramid's heart, a room is waiting that limestone is not good enough for. You will never see the king's chamber, almost no one alive will, but the specialists speak of it in the tone men use for holy things and dangerous ones. A chamber for the god king's sarcophagus, buried in the monument's core, walled and floored and roofed entirely in this southern granite. And the roof is the marvel and the nightmare. Great granite beams laid flat overhead, the largest stones in the entire pyramid. Some of them, the future will reckon 40, 50 tons and more. Hoisted by ramp and lever, and methods the coming centuries will argue about at length, hundreds of feet up into the sky, then eased into place above the king's eternity, with nothing but timber, rope, sand, and nerve. Above them, the builders stack more granite in relieving tiers, spreading the mountain's crushing weight away from the sacred ceiling, and on those hidden beams, where no eye will go, work gangs paint their names. 4,500 years from tonight, those beams will still be holding. Not one will have cracked through. Engineers with instruments will crawl the chambers and come out speaking softly. You watch the rose-gray stone ride past the quay, dense with distance and labor, and you think about the pounders of Aswan, 500 miles of river away, strangers you will never meet, wearing out their arms on the same king's dream. The pyramid, you are beginning to understand, is not being built at Giza. It is being built by Egypt, all of it, at once. Before we leave the plateau for the evening, come stand with the old men and the strings, because the deepest wonder of this place is not that the stones are heavy, it is that the mountain is true. The pyramid's base covers 13 acres, a platform you could set 8 or 9 football fields of the far future upon, and yet from corner to distant corner, its levelness errs by less than the width of 2 fingers. Its 4 sides face the 4 quarters of the world so exactly that the future's compasses and satellites will find them off true north by a 20th of 1 degree, an error smaller than the thickness of the shadow on a sundial. Whole centuries will refuse to believe it. They will summon aliens, lost civilizations, vanished sciences, anything but the truth you can watch any evening on the plateau, which is a handful of unhurried men with cords, plumb bobs, and the sky. The surveyors are the priesthood of string. You see them at dawn and dusk, when the light lies flattest, sighting along cords pulled taut between stakes, checking faces with a plumb line and a wooden square, reading the level with water and marks, laying red ochre lines for the setters to obey. For direction, they have the one reference that never lies. In Egypt, the sky is a public building. The stars that wheel around the unmoving north, the imperishable ones, the stars that never set, can be sighted, marked, halved, and turned into a line on the ground so close to true that eternity itself will barely catch the error. How exactly they do it, which stars, which tools, which ritual mornings, is knowledge that lives in a few gray heads, past master to apprentice, and the future will reconstruct it only in educated guesses. What you understand watching them is simpler and stranger. Every block you hauled was obeying a string. All season you thought you were fighting weight. You were, but the weight was the easy part. Weight only needs shoulders. The strings needed centuries. Behind those cords stand generations of quiet men, at pyramid after pyramid, each one correcting the last, for the kingdom has bent and buckled pyramids before, at Maidum, at Dashur, where a rising monument famously had to change its angle mid climb, and wears the bend to this day. Giza is what it looks like when a civilization has finished making its mistakes. The old surveyor nearest you steps back from his cord, squints along it at the mountain, and gives the smallest nod, as if the pyramid were an apprentice who has, at last, done something properly. Then the light goes, and the strings come down, and the truest building on earth stands in the dark, waiting for tomorrow's arithmetic. One evening at the harbor, you smell something that stops you mid step, a scent with no business existing on a desert plateau. Green, resinous, sweet, alive. You follow your nose down the quay, and there it is, being walked off a freighter on 40 shoulders. A tree. A single trunk longer than the barge that carried it, straighter than any string, with the warm color of honey. Cedar. And a boatman, enjoying your face, tells you where it grew. On mountains beside a northern sea, in a land called Byblos, so far away that the ship spent weeks on open water, not river, sea, the great green that swallows the horizon, to bring it here. Because here is the last secret of the mountain, the one you only learn by loitering at the harbor. Egypt, rich as she is, does not have everything. The gods gave her limestone beyond counting, sand beyond imagining, mud and grain and reeds and sun. But Egypt is a country almost without trees, palm and acacia, crooked and knotty, good for a doorpost, hopeless for a 40-foot lever arm or a sea-going hull. So the long timber for the sledge runners, the great levers, the boat frames, the beams that crib and cradle 50-ton granite on its journey skyward, that strength is imported strength, cut on foreign mountains by foreign axes, and sailed south by men who bargain in 3 languages. The copper has its own long story. Your chisels, the thousands upon thousands of soft, hard-working, endlessly resharpened chisels, begin as ore in the mountains of Sinai, across the eastern wilderness, where royal expeditions of miners and smelters and donkey caravans work in country so harsh it makes Giza look tender. The dolerite pounders come from desert quarries. The fine hard stone for vessels and tools rides in from Wadis you will never see. Even the humble gypsum for the mortar is cooked in industrial quantities from deposits along the desert edge, kiln after smoking kiln. Stand at the wall of the Crow some dawn and count what a single day delivers to this one project. Grain from the delta, cattle from the northern estates, fish from the river, white stone from Tura, granite from Aswan 500 miles south, copper from Sinai in the east, cedar from Byblos across the northern sea. Then understand what you are actually looking at, because it is bigger than a building. It is reach, a kingdom that can stretch out one arm the length of the known world, close its hand on a cedar or an ore seam or a granite bed, and bring it home on schedule. That kingdom has invented something no pharaoh will ever wear in a crown, and no future age will ever stop using. The boatmen have a saying, delivered with the smugness of men who have seen the great green and lived. The pyramid has roots. They run under the river, under the desert, under the sea itself, all the way to mountains where it rains. Imagine it, rains on trees. You touch the cedar trunk as it passes once, lightly, the way you would touch a traveler from a legend. It is cool, and faintly sticky, and smells like a world you will never visit, that came all this way to help hold up your stone. Even the mountain, it turns out, does not stand alone. Nothing here does. That, more than the stone, may be the real invention on this plateau. You know something is wrong, or something is right, which on this plateau produces exactly the same panic when the overseers start caring about how things look. For 3 days, the whole city scrubs. Ramps are resurfaced that did not need resurfacing. Rubble that has sat comfortably beside the causeway all season is suddenly an outrage and must vanish. The gangs are drilled on standing in lines, which, as Nefer observes from his convalescent mat, delighted, useless, and safe, is the one skill 20,000 haulers have never once needed. Fresh kilts are issued. The foremen develop a new voice, pitched somewhere between prayer and threat. And on the third evening, the word comes down the staircase of authority, from Ankov's household to the crew chiefs, to the Fileys, to the 10 sunburned men at your wall. Tomorrow, the god comes to see his horizon, the king, Khufu himself, coming here to the dust, to the ramps, to the world you haul in. You will remember the morning of it in pieces, the way people remember floods. The river arriving before the man, a fleet of vessels rounding into the harbor with the sunrise behind them, and at their center a barge that makes every hull you've ever admired look like a punt, gilded at the rails, hung with standards, moving to a drumbeat slower and heavier than any work drum, a heartbeat with an escort. The quays, the ramp edges, the rooftops of the barracks town, every surface that can hold a human being, holding one, and the silence, that is the peace that stays. 20,000 people who chant for a living, and when the carrying chair comes up from the water, with its fan bearers and its wall of shaved priests, the plateau is so quiet, you can hear the standards snapping in the wind off the desert. You are 11 rows back in your crew's block of lines, and so your entire glimpse of the living God, the reason for every blister you own, lasts perhaps the length of 4 heartbeats. A seated figure in white linen, gold at the throat, gold at the brow, one forearm resting on the chair's rail, smaller than the stories, as every king is, and stiller than any man you have ever seen, as perhaps only kings learn to be. He does not wave. Gods do not wave. He looks up. Everyone sees it. Everyone will describe it tonight, tomorrow, and for the next 50 years. He looks up at the mountain for a long, unhurried moment, the way a farmer looks at a field coming in well. And then the moment is over, and the great machine of the visit carries him away up the causeway to confer with Ankaf and the priesthood of String, and you never see him again as long as you live. That is all it is, your brush with the divine, 4 heartbeats and a held breath. And yet, walking down that evening, you find the whole plateau strangely lit from inside, not because the king was magnificent, though the beer will insist on it by nightfall, but because of that upward look. Whatever a farmer knows that look. It is the look that says, this is going to come in. The field you have broken your back on all season looked back at its owner today, with your gang's stones in it. The rations that evening are doubled by royal word. Beef for every crew, beer with real heft to it, and the town sings until the overseers give up pretending there is a curfew. Nefer, 3 cups in, foot propped on a bread crate, raises his voice over your division's corner of the din and proposes the only toast the day requires to the God who came to see our work. 10 cups knocked together. Somewhere above the lamplight and the noise, the mountain stands in the starlight, one course taller than yesterday. His horizon, your field, both true. That is the strangeness you fall asleep inside, and it never entirely leaves you. But a life is not only its labor, not even here. So come down off the plateau as the light dies, and see what the evenings are made of. The drum releases you at dusk, and 20,000 men flow south off the mountain like a tide going out, through the gate by the wall of the crow, down into the smoke and noise and bread smell of the town. This is the hour the whole day aims at. The washing first, canal water over dusty shoulders, men scrubbing each other's backs, the day's grit sluicing away gray. Then the queue, the blessed queue, where the evening loaves are warm and the beer jars come around, and your division claims its usual spot against a wall, still holding the sun's heat. And for a little while, nobody speaks at all, because eating after hauling is a form of prayer. Then the talk starts, and the town becomes a delta of voices. Every barrack street has its own weather. Hear a circle of northerners singing the long songs of the marshes. They're two men from rival gangs, arguing block counts with the passion later ages will reserve for sport. Further on, a famous liar from the second file, telling a crocodile story that grows a cubit every telling. Men play sonnet in the dust, moving pebbles across grids scratched into the ground or into spare flakes of stone, the game of passing 30 squares, half skill and half fate, and the plateau's fortunes and beer ride nightly on it. Somebody always has a flute. Somebody always has a grievance. Somebody always has a rumor. The king is coming to inspect. The beer ration is rising. A boat from the south brought a giraffe. None of it is ever true. All of it is discussed like scripture. And underneath the noise, quieter, run the threads that lead home. Men gather around anyone who can write, dictating messages to go north with the supply boats, to a wife, a father, a brother minding the herd. All well, send word of the children. Keep my sandals from your husband. You dictate your own, shy about it, to a young scribe who charges 1 onion and doesn't laugh at anybody. Weeks later, on a grain barge, an answer finds you. Your mother is well. The flood is a good one. Your brother has named a goat after you. It is meant affectionately, probably. You lie on your mat that night in the breathing dark of the gallery, 50 men settling around you like a tide, and you notice something that has crept up on you the way callus does. The snores have names now. The barracks smell like your own smell. When the man beside you mutters in Delta dialect in his sleep, it sounds like home. You are still counting the days until the boats take you back. Every man here is. But somewhere between the quarry and the ramps, without your permission, this ant heap of strangers has become something else. A village. Yours. Every 10th day, the drum does not sound. And the first time it happens, you sleep so far past dawn that you wake in a panic, heart slamming, halfway to your feet, and the whole gallery laughs at you because every new man does it, and every veteran remembers doing it. The Egyptian week is 10 days long, and the last of them, for most gangs on most rotations, belongs to you. Not to the king, not to the rope, to you, and to everything a working man must cram into the one day the machine lets go of him. The town on a rest day is a different creature. The plateau stands nearly silent, a mountain holding its breath, while the streets below boil. The canal banks turn white with laundry, kilts, and loincloths spread on the stones, men waiting and ringing and gossiping like the washerwomen of every village on earth. The barbers do a roaring trade, shaving heads and faces smooth against the heat and the lice, and the queue at a good barber is where all serious news is traded and most of it invented. Men mend sandals, restring beads, pick through the little market where boatmen sell delta dates, faience charms, combs, and, for the homesick, handfuls of actual black delta soil, which you absolutely do not buy and absolutely think about buying. There is religions in the day, too, the workaday kind. Small shrines stand between the barracks blocks, and men bring what they have: a loaf end, a splash of beer, a muttered arrangement, to the household gods who handle the practical departments of life. Bess, the ugly little dancing god who guards sleep and children. Taweret of the hippo's belly, who watches over wives far away. The plateau has its grand theology, but a hauler's prayers are freight sent to gods who answer letters. Mostly, though, the day is for the body and the small joys. Sleeping in the shade through the worst heat, swimming in the canal, badly, to the delight of everyone born nearer the water, eating slowly for once, a wrestling tournament between files that the overseers pretend not to sanction and absolutely bet on. Sitting with Nefer and his splinted foot, watching the light change on the mountain you are building, saying nothing much. By evening you are impossibly a little bored, the body so trained to the rope that idleness itches. The veterans say that's the sign you've truly arrived, when rest stops fitting properly. At the next dawn, the drum sounds, and the tide flows north again through the gate, and you go with it, sore, scrubbed, fed, and in the way of workers on every shore of history, obscurely glad to be back at the thing you spent all yesterday delighted to escape. 9 days to go. On the low slope west of the town, above the barracks and below the plateau, there is a hillside of small doors. You noticed it your first week and understood it at once, because every Egyptian understands it at once: a cemetery. What took you longer to understand is what it means. These are workers' tombs, modest ones, mud brick and scavenged stone, some shaped as little domes, some as miniature versions of the very monument their owners built, with tiny courtyards and tiny false doors where a soul can come and go. Inside lie foremen and bakers, masons and haulers, men and women of the pyramid city, buried with what a working family can give: bread, a jar of beer, a few tools, sometimes a scrap of inscription bearing a name and the only titles that ever mattered here: overseer of the side of the pyramid, director of workers, inspector of building. And the future should note the guest list, because when archaeologists open these graves, they will find them unlooted and unashamed, resting in plain sight of the king's own horizon. Stand here a moment and understand what this hillside is saying. In Egypt, where you are buried is not real estate, it is destiny. To lie forever beside the God King's resurrection machine, inside the holiest construction site on earth, is a privilege no kingdom grants to the disposable. These little tombs are the pyramid's honest signature. Chains do not build monuments that let the chained sleep beside the king. This hillside is the ground's own testimony, held in trust for 45 centuries until someone thought to ask, You come here twice during your rotation, once for a stranger, a mason from the other crew, taken by fever, given the whole slow ceremony, the washing, the wrapping, the procession with bread and beer, while his gang stands unspeaking in the sun. And once, near the season's end, for a man you knew, old Jady the rope master, who taught half the plateau their knots, whose heart simply stopped one evening between the meal and the singing, the gentlest death Giza has to offer. His division carries him up the slope themselves and lays him in a dome of brick with his palm fiber apron and a jar of the good beer. And his foreman says the words that he goes justified to a West that knows his name. And then, Egypt being Egypt, everyone goes back down the hill and eats in his honor until late, telling jady stories, each rope pulled by his hands growing stronger with the years, and the grief and the laughter braid together the way they always have at working men's funerals, on every riverbank, in every age. That night you think about it in the dark, that if the worst happened, they would carry you up that slope too, set bread beside you, spell your name, leave you for eternity in the king's own shadow. It does not make you less homesick, but it is not nothing to be somewhere you would be buried with honor. It is, in fact, the opposite of being nothing, which brings us in the deep quiet of the night to the question under all the others, not how, why. Why does a whole civilization pour its strength, its grain, its arithmetic, and its farmers' spines into one man's tomb? And why do you pull? Start where Egypt starts. The king is not a man. Not exactly. Khufu is Horus walking. The divine has a body, and the body has an address. The king stands where the gods and the kingdom meet, and everything that keeps your world alive flows across that meeting place. The rising of the river, the return of the sun out of every night, the order the Egyptians call Ma'at, the deal the universe keeps with those who keep it back. And the deal has a clause everyone on this plateau knows by heart. The king must not truly die. When his body fails, he must rise, join the sun's boat, take his place among the imperishable stars, and keep interceding for Egypt from the other shore, forever. The pyramid is how. Call it what it is, a machine for resurrection. Its shape is holy geometry, the primeval mound that rose from the waters at the world's first morning, a stairway of light, the very rays of the sun rendered in stone and pointed home. Sheathed at last in white Tura limestone, it will hold the sunrise like a lamp holds flame, visible for a day's walk in every direction. Proof, standing on the horizon, that death loses. You are not decorating a grave. As far as your whole world is concerned, you are building the device that keeps the sun coming up. That is the theology. But you're a farmer, not a priest, and farmers keep a second ledger. So here is the earthbound half of the truth, the half historians will still be marveling at when the gods of Egypt are museum pieces. This project is the kingdom becoming itself. To raise this one building, Egypt has had to learn how to count everything, feed everyone, move anything, and knit 1,000 miles of river villages into a single organism with one heartbeat. Your grandfather's Egypt could not have built this. The Egypt being forged on this plateau, the ledgers, the fleets, the granaries, the files, the men like Merer writing it all down, that Egypt will outlast every dynasty and bury 100 kings. Some future scholars will put it simply: Egypt built the pyramid, and the pyramid built Egypt. And you? You are not a theologian or a historian. Your reasons live lower down, where real reasons live. You pull because your name was on the list, and your father went when his was. Because the bread is honest, and never can't pull, and someone must. Because your gang would notice a slack rope, and their good opinion has come to matter more than you can say. Because some nights, walking down off the plateau, you turn and look up at the impossible thing catching the last light, the thing that exists partly because you exist, and something in your chest lifts before you can stop it. The king builds for eternity. You build for the 10th day, the boat home, and the men on the rope beside you. The mountain accepts both currencies. It always has. You notice it first at the harbor, the way harbor people always notice first. The water is going down. It happens the way all great things happen in Egypt, slowly, on schedule, exactly as it happened for your grandfather and his. The flood crests, pauses as if considering, and begins its long withdrawal. Day by day, the brown sea over the valley thins and shrinks. Mudbanks surface like the backs of sleeping animals. The canal to the plateau runs lower under the stone barges, and the boat pilots start grumbling, which is how you know the season is truly turning. Out in the valley, the drowned world is becoming fields again, and such fields. This is the whole point of the flood, the gift under the inconvenience. The water leaves behind a skin of black silt, soft and rich and smelling of life, the renewed flesh of Egypt itself. The land the river returns is not the land it took. It is better. It is always better. And a farmer feels that in his hands. All season you have been a hauler, a quarryman, a citizen of the ant heap. And now, standing on the quay, watching the mud shine, you feel your other self wake up like a limb you'd slept on. Somewhere north, your fields are rising out of the water. Planting is coming. The delta will need every back it can get, and the king's machine, which counts everything always, has already counted this too. The seasonal rotation is ending. The lists are being read again, this time in the direction of home. The last 10 days are strange and golden. The work goes on. The work always goes on. The year-round men, the masons and setters, and the priesthood of string will keep the mountain rising all winter while you plow, but the town underneath the work begins gently to dissolve. Delta men seek each other out in the evenings. Addresses are exchanged in the only form available. Third village past the Big Bend. Ask for the family with the twin palms. Debts of beer are settled or ceremonially forgiven. The young scribe with the onion rate does the business of his life in dictated letters. I am coming home. Prepare the good oil. Tell no one about the goat. On your last evening, your division eats together at the usual wall, and your foreman, a man who has addressed you all season exclusively in counts, corrections, and one memorable lecture about rope, stands, looks the 10 of you over, and says only, "You pulled true." Then he sits down and eats his fish. Men have been knighted with longer speeches. None was ever prouder of his. At dawn the drum sounds, but not for you. For you there is a list, a key, and a broad barge pointed north, riding the current toward everything you love. You step aboard with your sack, heavier now, a copper token of service, a Senate set Nefer carved you, Delta soil unnecessary, and you find a place at the rail as the lines are cast off. And then you do what every man aboard does, all of you at once, without a word. You turn and face south and look up. The pyramid stands over the harbor in the young light, taller than when you came, taller because of you, its unfinished summit hazed with the dust of crews already at work. From the moving deck, you can just hear it, the ring of copper on stone, faint as memory, the sound you will hear for the rest of your life in the moment before sleep. The barge swings north. The current takes her, and the mountain you built begins very slowly to let you go. It takes days to fall below the horizon. You keep catching it over a palm line between sails, once impossibly floating on the morning mist as if it had decided to come along. The veterans don't look anymore. You cannot stop. Somewhere past the river bend where you first saw it, you finally lose it for good, and the sky where it stood seems for a while badly made. The journey home runs downhill in every sense. No sail needed, the current doing the labor, the whole valley being born again on either bank. Everywhere it is the same scene, repeating like a blessing. Black fields steaming in the sun, seed grain going out in arcs from swinging arms, herds driven across the soft ground to tread the seed home, children and herons everywhere underfoot. The barge stops at village after village, and at each one a few men shoulder their sacks and step off into shrieking knots of family, and the rest of you cheer them ashore like a crew launching boats. Epi goes at a mound with 3 palms, lifting a small daughter who did not exist when he left. Nefer goes the next morning, splint and all, straight into an argument with his brothers about whether he can manage the plank, which he wins by managing the plank. And then, on an afternoon, you will remember in the hour of your death, the barge noses toward a mound crowned with palms and smoke that you would know blindfolded in another life from the smell of its cook fires alone, and the shape waiting on the landing, shading her eyes with one hand exactly the way she always has, is your mother. We can leave the rest of the landing private. Some things belong to the people in them, even 45 centuries later. That evening you sit where your father sits, which is a thing that has quietly changed, and the whole village drifts through the courtyard by lamplight to look at you. The same eyes, wider, that you once turned on returning men. Was it true about the white stone? Was the king as tall as the stories? Did anyone die? Is there really beef? And you hear your own voice doing what every voice back from Giza has ever done, telling it just slightly grander than it was, because the plain truth sounds like a lie anyway, so you might as well tune it. Late, when the courtyard empties, your father examines your palms in the lamplight, turning them over the way he did on the night before you left, reading the season in the callus like a scribe reading a roll. He nods once and pours you beer, and the two of you sit for a long time, saying absolutely nothing in the completely full silence of men who have hauled for the same mountain. Tomorrow, the plow. The river fell. The fields are black and waiting. Egypt turns. Years pass the way the river passes. The same water never twice. The same shape always. You plow, plant, harvest, marry. Children arrive and grow tall on flood silt and stories. Some seasons, the lists call your village again, and some they don't. You serve another rotation in your 20s, and later your role becomes the one your father played, packing sacks, examining palms, saying little. The pyramid becomes a fixture of your inner sky. News of it arrives with the boats, like news of a famous relative. The core is topped out, the chambers are sealed, the casing crews are working down the faces. And then, in a year when your eldest is old enough to man an oar, the word runs the length of the river like fire down a dry reed bed. It is finished. You go. Of course you go. Half the Delta goes, that year and every year after, whenever trade or duty or a wedding gives the excuse. You take your son south on a grain boat, retracing the water road of your youth, watching him watch the horizon exactly as Ippy once watched you. And when it comes, when the pale triangle stands up out of the earth's edge and refuses hour after hour to be a hill or a cloud, you have the deep particular joy of seeing the thing that silenced you silence your child. But nothing has prepared you, either of you, for what the mountain has become. The dusty golden stepped thing you hauled for is gone. In its place stands geometry made of light. The casing is complete. 4 faces of white Tura stone, dressed and polished from peak to base. Every joint vanished into smoothness, and the whole of it burns. At dawn, they say, it catches fire before the land knows the sun is up. At noon, it stands too bright to study. At dusk, it holds the light long after the valley has gone blue, glowing on the horizon like something the sky forgot to take with it. Boatmen navigate by it. Villages a day's walk distant see it as a fixed white star on the western rim of the world. At its very peak, so the boat pilots swear, and who are you to doubt boat pilots? The capstone flashes like metal, like gold, though no one you meet has climbed close enough to say. Your rough blocks, your gang's blocks, the ones with the painted boast, they are in there, deep under that perfect skin, in the blind dark of the core, holding everything up. No one will ever see them. That is what they are for. The polish gets the praise. The rough stone gets the weight. You stand on the deck with your hand on your son's shoulder and find you have no interest at all in explaining which of those is the honor. The king is in there too, they say. Sailed to the horizon at last, up through his machine of stone, and out among the imperishable stars, keeping, if the priests have it right, his half of the bargain. So the river keeps rising and the sun keeps clearing the eastern hills. You watch the mountain blaze until the light goes. Then you tell your son the true version. All of it, the drum in the dark, the sand and the bread, the rope's groove in your shoulder, JD's little dome on the western slope, the foreman's forward speech. It takes most of the night, and he does not sleep, and neither in the telling do you. It sucked, you tell him, laughing, old rope scars aching pleasantly on your palms. Gods, how it sucked. And I would not sell one day of it for the king's own barge. Now let the years go, let them all go, in one long exhale. Sleep does this kindness for us. It lets whole millennia pass gently, like water under a hull. Rest here and watch what the desert keeps. You live long for your world and die in your bed in the delta with the flood rising outside, which is how every Egyptian hopes to go, mid-blessing. Your grandchildren keep the stories, then their grandchildren keep the shapes of the stories, and eventually the river of generations wears even those smooth, the way it wears everything smooth, and your name survives, where it always survived, on a scribe's roll in a storeroom, doing its patient work of existing. The pyramid outlives everything else. It outlives Khufu's dynasty, and the old kingdom itself, and a dozen ages your language has no words for. Rome comes to stare at it when it is already older to the Romans than the Romans are to tonight's listener. The gleaming skin your generation gave it is finally taken back, stripped over centuries by later builders of a later city called Cairo, whose mosques and walls carry the white tourist stone still, so that even in being quarried, the pyramid went on building. What remains is what you knew, the honest golden core, your stone, stepped and rough and utterly unmoved, the oldest of the world's seven wonders, and the only one still standing under the sun. And then, latest of all, in the age the listener calls home, come the people with soft brushes, asking the ground the question no one had thought to ask it. Not who was buried here, but who built this? And the ground, which never once forgot, answers. It shows them the ant heap, your streets, your galleries, your bakeries, with the bell pots still in the ashes. It shows the seas of cattle bone that no slave gang ever ate. It opens the little tombs on the western slope, Jetty's dome, the foreman's yards, the proud small titles, sleeping in honor in the king's shadow, exactly as promised all along. It hands over the painted boasts of the gangs on stones from the hidden dark, still red, still legible, still funny. And in a dry cave by a far sea, it gives up a bundle of tattered papyrus, the timesheets of Inspector Marer and his 40 haulers of white stone, the oldest written pages of Egypt, and they turn out to be about you, not the king, the work, the boats, the loads, the ordinary days. Piece by piece in laboratories and lecture halls, the myth of the 100,000 slaves quietly falls, and the truth stands up in its place, stretching like a man off a reed mat. Farmers, neighbors, fathers and sons on rotation, paid in bread and beer, doctored and counted and buried with respect, who built the last surviving wonder of the world and signed it in red paint where only eternity could read. 4,500 years, and the verdict of every visitor who stands small at the mountain's foot is still the one Ippy promised on the barge. Everyone goes quiet the first time. That silence, traveler, that is your monument. The king got the stone, you got the awe, and now, at last, let it all grow still. The plateau at night, when the drum has released everyone and the last lamp in the barracks has been thumbed out. The mountain standing enormous and patient under the whole unrolled sky, holding the day's heat the way bread holds warmth, ticking softly as the stone cools. No chisels now, no counting, only the desert wind moving over 13 acres of sleeping geometry, and far below, the river, the great, slow, north-flowing certainty of the river, breathing past the harbor in the dark. Lie back on the reed mat of this moment. You pulled true today. The block is seated, the scribe has your name, the bread is eaten, and the beer is drunk, and the gang is breathing all around you in the dark, 50 tides going in and out. Somewhere on the slope, the little tombs keep their long appointment. Somewhere on the water, Mirror's boat rides at anchor, logbook closed. Somewhere overhead, the imperishable stars wheel around the still point of the north, exactly where the old men's strings said they would be. Everything heavy has been set down. That is the whole secret of this place and of this hour. Even a mountain is only ever carried one stone at a time, and every single stone gets put down. Yours too. Whatever you hauled today, wherever your ramp was, it is seated now. It will hold until morning without you. Let your shoulders admit it. Let your hands open. The flood is doing the slow silver work it has always done, and the fields you cannot see are growing richer in the dark, and 4,500 years of nights, exactly like this one, have all, every single time, safely reached the dawn. The river falls, the river rises, the mountain keeps the horizon, and you, builder, hauler, keeper of an honest ledger of aches, you have earned this next part more than anyone. Sleep now, the way the pyramid sleeps, heavy and calm and certain of tomorrow. Thank you for spending tonight in the dust and glory of Giza, among the farmers who lifted a wonder of the world and were nearly forgotten for it. If this journey helped you drift, the subscribe button is right there in the dark, and there are many more long nights of history waiting for you. A whole catalog of ordinary people whose stories deserve the telling. But that's for another night. For now, let the barge carry you the rest of the way. The water is calm, the current is kind, and home is just downriver. Rest easy, sleep well. This is Drowsy History.